When we first got affiliated with Jamie, he was in Australia, and then Google, with their bags of money, looking for world-class engineers, went down and snatched him up. And we've done several projects with Jamie, and his skills are truly amazing. He's one of the few engineers who seems to understand what you're saying and give you what he says he's going to give you, and it pretty much works. You know, like on all software, you have to do a little QA because you got one engineer producing it. But we produce a product with Jamie in conjunction with Intel, and they're putting it into the schools in India. We're now working on a project to make Webmin run on Windows. And we have a version of Webmin, totally open, that is open country labeled, and if you ever want to do dead serious backup, which is Bacula, we have an interface to it. Bacula does everything that's very difficult. However, most people just won't go near something like Bacula. This is the kind of thing you would use in a large enterprise, that kind of thing. There are a couple of other backups inside of Webmin you can use, including Amanda and...
well, the ones that come bundled with it are for MySQL, PostgreSQL, and just general file backup with tar. That's the those are the three sort of major ones,
which are very, very handy in virtual hosting environments.
Yeah.
And one of the products is UserMin and VirtualMin, and they're designed for hosting and ISPs. And with something like UserMin or VirtualMin, what you can do is have multiple users, give them access to their website as if they had root, or whatever permission you want to give them, and they can manage it. And one of the problems with ISPs, of course, is getting your account changed, and it's a tool that simplifies that. Anyway, I'll leave it up to Jamie to proceed from here.
All right. Okay, so yeah, I don't know how many of you have used Webmin before, so basically I'll start with a sort of basic introduction of it. What it is a web interface you can access through your web browser, and it allows you to configure your Linux, or in fact pretty much any other Unix system. What you're looking at here is the main screen. If you've used it before, this may look a little different because I've been tweaking the user interface, and you've got a lot of selections of you know, what I call themes that you can use for different user interface designs. But this is the one that I've sort of come up with most recently. Yeah, the old one was getting a bit too graphical heavy. But the important thing along the left-hand side there are what I call the categories. And if you open up a category, clicking on it, you can see there's a whole lot of modules under there. And there's, as you can see, there's quite a few categories. And each one of them has quite a lot of modules in there for various purposes. And I click on a module, it comes up in the right-hand side there. Yeah. So yeah, for in this case, we've got one of the most commonly used and one of the first developed modules, which is managing just your users and groups on your system. And if you're familiar with Unix, you know that usually these are stored in the file like /etc/password. And if you want to add a user, you can either edit that file directly, or you can use the user add command. You know, all pretty much done at the command line. What Webmin lets you do is create users through a browser-based interface like this, so you can just fill in the details. We'll create one now, right? Most of the details will get filled in automatically. Click create. And it's done. And now I'd be able to log into the machine as that user. His home directory and everything gets set up automatically. Pretty much, you know, like what you would get if you used the user add command of the command line.
For something like this, like users and groups, it already got stuff built in for taking care of machines where editing etc password isn't the right thing to do.
You're talking about like NIS and LDAP?
Yeah, and then like netinfo on Macs and stuff like that.
There are actually separate modules for those. Because there are different things that can be stored in those cases, there are different modules for managing LDAP There's one for managing LDAP, one for managing NIS, and this one is for managing etc. password. Unfortunately, there's no sort of standard API or way of doing things on Linux systems that can configure all those sources from a single point. So the way I had to develop it was with separate modules. So yeah, I mean, as you can see here, you've got your users, and if I scroll down, then there's groups as well, and you can edit those in the same way by adding new members to groups.
So you added JavaScript to the interface?
There is a little bit of JavaScript. Initially, I started out with absolutely zero JavaScript, but now I've gone for a little bit just to add a bit of highlighting, and so when you click on something, it highlights the row, that kind of stuff. It's sort of a bit of eye candy, but it doesn't actually, I guess it's not actually required. So if you're using a really, really old web browser, or a web browser on your cell phone or something like that, it will still work. Yeah.
What if you have multiple clients trying to modify the same data?
That's why it does locking of files
Oh,
when you modify them to prevent exactly that from happening. Anytime that it writes out any kind of file, it will do two things. First thing is it will lock the file so that no other program, or at least no other instance of, no other program that does locking can modify it at the same time. Of course, other programs are free to ignore that, but certainly no two Webmin instances are going to be modifying that same file at the same time. And also, when it writes out a file, it always writes it out to a temporary file first, and then renames that over the original file, so that if you run out of disk space halfway through writing the file, like your password file, it doesn't get totally erased, which did happen a few times before I added that feature. People got sufficiently pissed off about it that I was forced to make a massive change to implement it.
Do you have any idea how many people are using it, Jamie? Our estimate was 2 to 3 million, but that was hard to measure.
It's very hard to measure. I mean, there's like 4,000 downloads a day. How many? I mean, it's very hard to say how many users. It must be like at least 1 million, I guess. How many of them do download it? Actually use it, I can't say.
And then there are distributions like Debian, which bundle it with the distribution.
Yeah.
No way to know that.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's in Debian, it's in Fedora Extras, it's in Mandrake, I think, and a few other sources.
You mentioned that you annoyed Google by not having that feature. That assume that means they use it. What other major users?
No. It wasn't Google that was annoyed by that. It was other users.
Oh, I thought you said Google. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Unfortunately, Google doesn't use it at all. The stuff they do is on much higher scale. I mean, Webmin is really designed for managing one machine, a few machines, not the large number of machines whose number I cannot disclose here that Google has. To show you some of the other features in there, another one that's commonly used is this boot up and shut down. And that base module can actually reboot the machine, but it can also show you all the services that get started when the machine is booted up, like IP tables, which is one for starting up the firewall. If I click on that, I can see the script that gets run. I can click various buttons down the bottom there to activate and deactivate it, or set for it to be run, to be started when the system boots up. Another useful one is this system logs module. I can see all the log files on the system, and I can control exactly what gets logged to each one. Or I can click on a button here to hopefully view recent messages in that file and search for them. And that's handy for like finding recent logins by a particular user, or various kinds of error messages about hard disk failures, that kind of thing. So through that you can see access all the logs. Another commonly used one is for cron jobs. Cron jobs on a Unix system are like repeating tasks. You want something to run, every day at 3 a.m. to do whatever. That's created as a cron job. Normally, to set one of those up, you have to run the cron tab command and then edit some file which is in a non-trivial format. This lets you set them up by basically selecting the times and days that you want it to run from those menus there. You see this job has a rather confusing schedule. It's like every 5 minutes for all hours, days, months and years.
So if you wanted to go from hour 3 to hour 9, you'd have to click 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9?
Yeah, if I wanted to change it so it ran from 3 to 9, I can just like shift click
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So all these user interface elements are just your standard web form fields. Just not really.
You want it every other hour?
Yeah, you would have to select. You have to control click them like this. I can hold down control and
Right, okay.
click. That gets people very confused actually, because if you don't hold down control and just click on one, it deselects all the other ones. But I'm sort of at the mercy of what user interface the web browser can provide. But that said, it's a pretty good user interface. We were talking about backups before. There's a module here. Basically, it lets you set up regular scheduled backups of various directories, and you can say, okay, I want to back up my /etc directory or my /home directory as a tar file and send it to some other server via SSH or FTP send it to some other server via SSH or FTP every day at midnight. And this module lets you do that. And of course, it also lets you restore as well, so that if you lose your data, you can get it back. And it supports the tar format, which is the most common one. Most people use with the tar command. And this ext dump format, which is not as commonly used, but it has the advantage that it preserves a lot more, some additional information about files like their ACLs and things like that. But either way you go, this makes it fairly easy to set up.
ext dump, you mean the utility called dump, or
yeah,
it's a different one?
Well, I'm not sure what it varies from system to system, but I think it's either dump or ext3 dump.
Okay.
So this is supposed to be like the old dump and restore from like SunOS and stuff?
Yes, it's the same family of commands, and if you use that module on SunOS, it will use those dump and restore commands.
It's from before SunOS. It was back in the early Berkeley system.
Yeah,
I mean, there's file system dependent is the problem, so you can't mix and match.
yeah, that's right. That format has its advantages. It's only advantages that it preserves everything about the file. Its disadvantages that you can't restore it on. You can't take a backup from Linux and restore it on Solaris. That's why that module offers the tar format as well. Another useful module is this one called Disk and Network File Systems. This is where you can see all the file systems that are mounted on your server, like from hard disks or CD-ROMs or from network drives. And there's a few other special ones that show up in there, like the /proc file system. And then you can add new ones, or you can mount them or unmount them so they become active. That's useful when you're adding a new hard disk, or when you want to access files on your Windows box or another Linux box over the network. And that, if you're familiar with the Unix files, that goes and edits the file /etc/fs tab, which is where all the file systems that are mounted when the system is started up are stored. So let's look at some of the other categories. Another useful one is this servers category. And probably the most popular thing in there is this Apache module. Apache, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the most common web server on Linux systems. So this module lets you do things like configure, what directory Apache uses for files, set up access control on directories, add new virtual hosts so that the one web server can serve multiple domains with different content, all that kind of stuff. And it's pretty complicated because it supports almost all the things that you can do in Apache by editing the configuration files, but through a user interface.
Well, I got a question. So your application writes a structured
Yes.
Apache config
Yes.
file,
It reads and writes the Apache config
and
file.
it puts up with that. Does it do any hand-holding to make a person make the right choices? Because I found that particularly to be also a black hole if you didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it does a limited amount. It prevents you from putting in syntax errors. It will prevent Apache from even starting up. So you can't really, but it doesn't necessarily prevent you from putting in stupid configurations that don't do what you want. And that's why I've got other modules that are actually built on top of this that simplify things even further for you. So you can just say, I want to add a new website, and it does a lot of the Apache configuration for you. But I'll get to that later.
Well, if you already have, like, let's say a very complex Apache config, does it handle that at all, or is it only for when you're starting off with a generic one?
No, it will handle your existing configuration. All the Webmin modules have been written so that they will read your existing configuration files to the limits of my ability to parse them, which is pretty complete, I think. It doesn't keep like a separate database of configurations and then use that to overwrite your existing configurations. It always reads the existing files, and if you've got comments in there, it will try and preserve those comments, where possible. I mean, sometimes you might have a comment on the end of a line, and if it modifies that line, then the comment on the end is gone. But if you've got a comment and then some line underneath it, some configuration line in Apache, and you change that configuration, the comment above it will be preserved.
That sounds like a very difficult task.
It is, because in a lot of cases I've got to reverse engineer well, not really. I mean, the file formats for all these things are documented, but I've got to write my own parsers for them, because things like Apache, it's got some code to parse these configuration files, but that's all in a C program, and Webmin's all written in Perl, so in almost no cases can I actually use existing parsers. And the only exceptions for that are a few programs have XML configuration files, and there are libraries out there to parse those. But yeah, the general idea is don't break the existing configurations. So I won't go too deeply into the Apache module because it's too complicated. Another popular one is this bind module, this DNS server. DNS is what when you type in www.google.com in your web browser, DNS is what turns that into the IP address that actually your computer actually talks to, and that is done by every single domain out there on the internet, like opencountry.com or whatever, is served by a DNS server, and Webmin lets you set that up, so you can define what IP address each name like www or FTP within each domain resolves to. And you can set things like, what mail server handles mail in the domain, that kind of stuff. And if you look here, you can see all the domains I've got defined on this server. And if I click on one, then I can see different types of records. And if I click on one of those types, I can see what the IP addresses are for each kind of, for each host name within that domain. And then I can go and click on one of those and change it. And then that'll go and update the appropriate configuration file on the system. So yeah, I mean, if you had to do that manually, you'd be going in and editing some file in the /var/named directory and then changing the IP address. And then you've got to remember to change the serial number at the top of the file as well, which is easy to forget. Whereas Webmin does that kind of thing for you automatically. So that
after you change it, how do you sync up to the...
Oh, how do you tell it to reread it? Pretty much this module and pretty much all modules wrong one, have a button, usually on the main page somewhere, saying like apply changes. Well, in this case I can't apply because the name says it's not running yet. If I start it, well, no luck there. I think I've got it actually set up on this laptop. But down the bottom of that page there'll be a button saying apply changes, and that'll basically tell the name server to reread its configuration, make it active. And yeah, like the Apache module has a similar thing. There's a button on the main page saying apply changes. That's because most servers have like an in-memory, they have in memory what their current configuration is, and they only reread it from the file when you tell it to. And it's probably not a good idea for Webmin to tell the server to reread from the file all the time, because that could slow the system down and it could lead you to activating incomplete configurations.
You should move the laptop to the edge of the table a little more so that you don't have to stand in people's way.
Sure.
It's kind of hard to see the screen.
Okay. So what else have we got in here? Oh yeah, MySQL. It's a very popular database server. There's a few books about it at the front there. If I click on this MySQL module, I can see all the, at the top there are all the databases that have been created on this system. And if I click on one of them, like Bacula, I can see all the tables and indexes in that database. And if I click on one of those tables, I can see the actual structure of the table, the fields, and I can go and add new fields. And then I might even be able to view the contents of the table. No, this table doesn't have any contents, but if it did, I'd be able to see what's actually in the database. So if you're you know, writing your own programs and you want to set up a database for it with some tables, then this lets you do that through a relatively simple point-and-click user interface. And there are other tools out there that actually do this, but like PHP MyAdmin, but it's quite a popular feature. This has gone into Webmin as well, and you don't have to mess around with you know, SQL if you don't want to, but you can if you want to. And you can also set up permissions and so forth. You can control who has access to what tables. That's most useful in a certain environment where you have a server that's got a lot of users on it, and you want people to have their own separate logins.
If you don't have the server, say you don't have any database
Yeah.
servers anywhere, is it still going to show up in?
No, if you haven't got MySQL installed and you click on that, it'll say, sorry, you don't have MySQL installed. And it might offer you a link to go and to automatically install
Will
it.
that click actually show up on the menu if MySQL isn't there? Because sometimes you don't expose things that are not there.
Generally, modules will appear on the left menu, even if the underlying server is not there. There's a couple of exceptions to that where it doesn't make any sense to show something because you've already got some contradictory thing installed. But a classic example is Grub and Milo. And those are like the two alternate programs you can use in Linux that load up the system when you boot up, and load up the kernel when you boot up the system. And you know, if you've got one installed, you're typically not going to be using the other. So in that case, Webmin only shows the link for one of them on the left menu.
Can I make a feature request?
Yeah.
When you have blobs in MySQL, it displays them.
Yeah.
Put an option somewhere so it doesn't display them.
Oh yeah, sure, it's already in there.
It is there? Okay.
You click on this. Almost all modules have this link at the top on the main page called Module Config. It lets you set various options. And for example, here this thing saying show blobs and text fields as, instead of showing data, you can show it as links.
Oh, okay.
So in that case, if you've got like a big blob, like an image or something in there, it'll just show it as a link you can click on and the image will appear.
You might want to do that by default, at least for the last couple of installs, I didn't even look.
Pages that refers to servers that aren't installed, does that by any chance gray out the user interface elements on Webmin, or does it still try and go and execute something even if you click on the button?
It will generally just display like an error page. Like look at this one here, for instance. This is for something called OpenSLP, and it's not installed on this laptop. So it comes up with a page like this saying it's not installed. And you won't see all the rest of the user interface elements. You've got to go and install that. In some cases, there'll be a link underneath that saying, click here to have it installed now. On some systems like Debian and Fedora, they have these update services like Yum and apt that can automatically download and install something for you, and Webmin will call those for you to you know, do the work of actually installing it. And then you can come back here, and now the thing is installed, you can actually configure it. So that's the general model I followed. Though is, you know, if it's not installed, you just get an error message.
Okay. I know some people would probably prefer to grayed out so that they know that there's no point even clicking on it.
If you don't want it to appear at all, you can go say to this Webmin category, click on Webmin users, click on say your login, which is admin, typically, or root. Hang on a second. It should come up with a, after a bit of grinding on my slow laptop, it'll come up with like a list of all the modules that are installed, and you can just deselect the ones that you don't want. And there's even a button somewhere down the bottom here, which is just called Hide Unused, and that will automatically take away access to any modules that are for programs that are not installed on your system. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people do that. They just hide the modules. They don't, because you know, if you're not running MySQL, there's no point in even being in the menus.
But you have to do that manually?
Well, that's what, there's that hide button which will basically automatically take away.
Which is the hide button? Just undo that.
Do that right down there, it says hide unused. If you click that, it'll basically take away from your view any modules that correspond to servers that you don't have installed.
Is that as of that point in time, or is that dynamically up to date?
It's as of that point in time.
I see.
It's not dynamically checked because that would be too slow,
Yeah,
I found. It can be expensive to look through all the files and see
So-
what is and is not there.
If you clicked it now, the one that you showed us a few minutes ago would now appear?
Yeah, of course, it's a bit slow. It has to go through and check all the modules to make sure all the stuff is... So I'm not going to do it on this laptop, unfortunately. So one area of Webmin that I haven't gotten to is this, what I was sort of briefly went past just now, was this Webmin Users module. This is sort of like a module that configures Webmin itself. In this case, it lets you create additional logins. When you first install it, typically you get one login, which is root, and you log in as root with your root password, whatever the root password is on your box. This page can be used to create additional logins, and they can be given limited privileges. So you might want to give some other guy permission only to configure your DNS server. So you can create a new user, and set some password, and then I can scroll down here, and I can just select DNS server, and when I go click save down the bottom, that'll create a user who, when he logs into Webmin, can only manage DNS. And you can actually lock the user down even further than that. Yeah.
So he'd be doing that as root,
Yeah.
but he would only have access to that feature.
Yeah, that's right. All the Webmin modules run, all the code runs as root, pretty much almost all the time. And it has its own sort of access control system, which is separate from Unix permissions, which is tricky to implement securely. But yeah, you can say, okay, I want this guy to only be able to edit these 5 domains, and not to be able to add new domains, and that would pretty much lock him down to only those particular configuration files.
One of the biggest criticisms of Webmin that I've heard is that it does run as root, and therefore you've got this web server and all these Perl scripts running as root, and if there's some kind of a bug, then there may be ways people get inappropriate access. What is your standard answer to that?
The standard answer is that almost everything that it does has to be done as root. It's talking about editing. It's editing configuration files that are owned by root and that can only be edited by root. So that's why it has to run like that. Now, I guess it might be possible to write some kind of an intermediate layer that avoids that. Some sort of subsystem that runs as root, and the rest of it doesn't run as root. But I don't think that would really gain a lot, because this subsystem would have to be callable by the main part of Webmin, and would have to be able to do pretty much everything anyway. So you haven't really removed the risk. I know there are tools that do that, like SSH, OpenSSH. It has a tiny, most of it runs as some non-root user like nobody, and there's this little sub-process that runs as root, and all that does is check passwords or something like that, right? So, and because it's very limited in what it can do, and it can be made secure, then that secures the whole system. But in the case of Webmin, this part that runs as root has to have the power to edit practically every configuration file on the system. So you haven't really, reduced your security vulnerability.
But almost all the system management systems run at root at some level.
Yes, they do. But I'm just, I'm just wondering what is the answer that we could tell those people.
Yeah.
It's okay that it runs as root because.
All system management.
Yeah.
OpenVision, CA, everybody's. They actually, when you get right down to the part where you're talking to the machine and doing the work, it's root. And some of them use some messaging protocols between that and the client, but if I can trick the client into doing what I want, it doesn't matter whether it's root or not.
That's my thinking.
And the things you want to do, the things you do is root.
Yeah.
Well, any of the system management systems have essentially the same problem. They handle it in different ways.
Yeah. I guess this comes into effect most when you're talking about creating users who have lesser permissions, and it's quite difficult when I'm coding this to make sure that if you create a user who's only supposed to be able to manage a few DNS domains, that he can't somehow go out and modify some other file on the system or run some arbitrary command Because if he could do that, then it would be all over. He would have escaped this sort of Webmin access control mechanism and then gotten out to gain full root privilege. So it's difficult to do, but I haven't found too many. I haven't heard of too many bugs in that area recently.
Create a user like backtick sudo root.
Yeah, exactly. Anything like that, or like, they figure out a way to edit the file //// etc. password. Getting out of the directory they're assigned to and things like that. So it's a risk. It's difficult to manage. It's possible to manage, I think.
Usually if they had that skill, they'd have other ways of doing it anyway.
Yeah. Probably the
They
biggest...
wouldn't be using this that way.
Yeah. The biggest security risk that I find, I'm more worried about is remote attacks. People who try and connect to the Webmin server and make it do things when they haven't even logged in at all. And there have been a few of those that have come up, in the last few years, where people have managed to bypass its authentication mechanism by various tricks, specially crafted URLs containing null bytes and things like that. So I had to quickly release updates to fix those. Usually they get reported to me by the good guys, by security researchers. Yeah.
Well, question. Now, does Webmin itself accept a kind of input configuration file? So like, let's say you're going to distribute a whole bunch of computers, you want them all set up the same.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could just send them, for that Webmin, you could send them a basic skeleton that Webmin would read and use that as its initial configuration?
It uses it as its initial configuration, whatever you've got on the system, really. So it doesn't create configuration files itself. It just reads existing configuration files.
Does it write a change log?
Yes, it can write a change log. One of the features in there is logging. So under this Webmin favorite, there's a module called Webmin Actions Log, and every action someone takes is logged and can include file changes as well.
I was just thinking to myself, that would be handy, especially if you get lost and you have to back up.
Yeah.
Or if somebody got into it that made some mistakes and they call you and say, help.
Yeah. I have some limited support for basically rolling back configuration changes, but it's fairly limited at the moment because it's very tricky. Because what if you did something wrong and then someone else came along and did something that they really did want to do? You've got to roll back the wrong thing without wiping out the correct thing.
Yeah.
That's very tricky to do.
Well, got a question. Have you, from your point of view, you've been dragged through every parser problem that could be created as all these 20 years of Unix ago.
Yeah.
And have you had woken up at night and wished aloud that there could be a single parser and vocabulary design for the entire Unix system?
It would be nice. I mean, it's certainly true that there are big differences, not just among different Unixes, but among different Linuxes in the format of their configuration files and the location of their files. And just the worst example is network configuration files, right? Like on Red Hat derived distros, they're in /etc/sysconfig, and in Debian they're in something like etc. networking interfaces, and in Gentoo they're who knows where, right? And in the SUSE they're in something like some etc. SUSE something or other file. So every distribution has its own different way of doing things, and of course Solaris has something totally different as well, and Mac OS 10 has something totally different as well. So yeah, that is a huge pain to deal with, and there's a lot of code in Webmin to say, okay, if you're running on some Red Hat distribution, go look in this place for this kind of file in this format, and then read it and then convert it to some kind of internal representation that then the user interface can display. So I wish there was more consistency here.
Well, but I remember when XML kind of started making waves, how many years ago? That it seemed to be something to say, well, look, everything should be written in XML, and you should run a little engine that kicks out the configuration and another little engine that presents the display.
Well, actually, that would be nice. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of XML. It's a bit verbose and it's hard to edit manually. But it would be nice in a way if things did standardize on that, because even among different programs, there are different sort of ways of representing data. Like, you know, some use like lines with curly brackets on them to represent new subsections, and some of them have like angle brackets with tiles, and inside that there are some directives. So many different programs have the same concept of configuration options that are in sections, and they represent it in the file in different ways. And if they're all using XML, then there'd only be one way, which is sort of the XML way. That would simplify things a bit. But that said, very, very few programs actually use XML configuration files.
I thought that was an idea that's kind of past. It's really kind of, XML is awful.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it has its uses, and I could probably benefit from it somewhat. But unfortunately, it seems that the trend among Linux distributions has become more divergent. Like, you know, Ubuntu has recently introduced some new system for how a new set of configuration files and stuff that's run when the system boots up, which is subtly different from all the other Linux distributions. So, you know, that requires some extra coding on my part to handle.
Well, now, what are they doing? That's the question. Why did they go to these screwy things like the sudo?
I don't know why they did it. Maybe they thought that the old format. I mean, I know why they did it, because the old format didn't really capture the dependencies between things properly. So, you know, they wanted to speed up the system. But anyway, that's we have a whole talk just on that kind of insanity, really. So let me get back to here. Look at this. This networking category has got quite a few interesting things in it. What you see on this system, by the way, has got more modules than what you get on a standard Webmin install, because there's tons of stuff that I've been developing or that, you know, under contract for other people, or, you know, experimental stuff, unreleased stuff, you know, third-party modules that I've downloaded and installed. So, yeah.
About 110 standard modules, right?
Yeah, about that.
And about 250 add-in modules.
Yeah, I think it depends. I'm not sure how many of those are still actually downloadable, but you have to clean them up. But a good, well, one of the more useful modules is this Linux firewall, which, as its name suggests, lets you set up a firewall. And on this system, there's no firewall defined at all. But I can use this to say, add a rule to say, any traffic that comes in from, so I'm going to drop anything from the IP address 1.2.3.4. So that goes and creates a rule for you. And normally if you wanted to do that under Linux, you have to type, you know, the IP tables command, or you have to edit the appropriate configuration file for your distribution. Yeah.
Is there a way to get it to actually show you the IP tables rule that is generated?
No. I mean, you can go in and look at the configuration. You could use that you can actually, I'll tell a lie, you can. That logging module that I was talking about just now, if I go back there and I say, okay, I want to see stuff that I've done in the last 24 hours. And I said, okay, I've added this change. I click on that. So you can actually see what changes were made. And that line there is the line that it added to the IP tables configuration file. It sort of shows it in what they call a diff format. Yeah.
What about IPFW?
Oh, if you were running this on, say, some BSD system, you would see and there's a module for IPFW. And there's also a module for something called IP filter, which is common on Solaris. So there's actually like 3 separate firewall modules for 3 different kinds of firewalls that I support, which all have subtly different capabilities, which is very annoying. But you know, fortunately, Sun paid me to write the one for Solaris, so turned out to be
One of the firewalls, as I remember, is a Shorewall, has 5 different interacting config files.
Oh, it's more than 5.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare to go in there by hand.
Shorewall is another thing that Webmin supports, can configure as well. And Shorewall is like a meta firewall. You define these rules that then go and create your actual firewall. Like, it's sort of like a simplified firewall, but they've actually become so complicated that it's actually no more simple now than just creating your firewalls rules directly, in my opinion.
So it's like 10 different files.
Yeah, it has a whole lot of different configuration files. And you know, there's like modules for configuring your network interfaces. So you want to set what your your DNS server is. I can click in here and set it. And so these are the DNS servers that are set up on this machine. And you can configure your network interfaces that get started up in boot time. So if you're a machine learned network, you can choose what the IP address is going to be. It's not very exciting on this laptop because it's all automatic, and it's not even plugged into the network currently. But it's most useful on a server where you maybe have a lot of virtual IP addresses. Yeah, well, one module that I've been working on recently with Open Country is this module for Bacula. And Bacula is this really powerful backup solution that can back up a whole lot of different servers, from a whole lot of different machines on the network, and then bring all their files in and write them to various tapes and so forth. So there's a module for that lets you define things like backup jobs. These are just the default set of jobs. Whoops, I'm trying to delete them. That was a bad idea. So yeah, if you've ever used Bacula, it's got a fairly complicated configuration file that you go edit, and this sort of simplifies it by putting it all in a web interface.
This is in beta, and the people, and it's been released, and the people who signed up have been very enthusiastic about what it does for using Bacula. A lot of the Bacula folks have signed up. That's a perfect example of what Webmin does.
And then there's quite a lot of modules for sort of configuring Webmin itself. One of them is this one for Perl modules. Basically, it'll find all the Perl modules that are currently installed on your system and let you install new ones. If anyone's familiar with Perl programming, you could see that could be fairly useful.
Do you use a template toolkit?
My own template toolkit, which is sort of, it's like a set of functions that generate user interface elements. For the longest time, the code actually generated the HTML manually by printing out actual HTML, but I've been trying to get away from that because that's really evil. It's a really stupid thing to do. But back when I started it, there wasn't really anything else to do.
When did you start?
About 97. Yeah. Initially started out with just DNS, and then it grew from that to encompass a whole lot of other things. This Perl thing is going to take a long time, so I'll cancel that.
Trying to go out through and find all the modules.
Yeah, that's the trouble with Perl. Actually, there's no way to there's no file that gives you like a list of all the Perl modules. You've got to go and look through all the appropriate directories. You can see the process for that is now sitting there running. One of the useful modules is this running processes. It's sort of like the PS command. I can go and I can see a process. No, it looks like it finished. And one of the processes is itself, of course. But yeah, I can go in, I can search for processes by various means. I can see all the processes that I'm running. I can go and kill off all those processes, things like that. It's similar to your kill all and kill commands that you might use at the command line. There's probably a bunch more stuff here under servers that I can go into. A useful one is this one for reading mail. If you're on a system where you have a lot of users, like a mail server, you can go in and actually see what mail each user has received. Hopefully there won't be any obscene spam in these user mailboxes.
Only supports inbox though, right?
Oh no, it supports Mbox and Maildir and another one called MH, which isn't very commonly used.
Which one does Kmail use?
Maildir. So yeah, when you set up this module, you tell it what mail server you're using, and it'll go and look at that mail server's configuration and say, okay, it's set up to deliver to this mail directory or this inbox location or something like that, and it'll go and find the mail file for you automatically. But it's handy on a mail server to go and see. Sometimes users can't download their mail because they've got a huge thing in there in their mail file, so the admin can go in and delete it and that kind of thing.
Can you delete a QMail file without stopping QMail?
You're talking about a Q file or a mail
I
file?
meant the Q file.
Webmin can delete QMail Q files. I just can't remember off the top of my head whether it stops QMail or not, but it does whatever the right thing is.
How does the Webmin server handle communication with the server it is controlling?
Oh, well, in a variety of different ways, really. Like some servers have commands that can be run to perform various actions, like say delete something from the mail queue.
Oh, I meant if it's on a different machine, or does it have to run on the same?
It runs on the same machine. It always, because it's access to a web browser. I didn't figure there was any need to add like an additional layer of sort of between the Webmin server and the actual server, which may have been a bad decision, but it makes it simpler to implement. There is some of that actually. There is some support for what I call cluster features in there, where you can do things like, if you have Webmin installed on 10 machines, you can designate one of them to be the master, and you can go and push out an RPM package to get installed on all of those 10 machines at once. But that functionality is kind of limited because there's only so many things that you can do when you're managing multiple machines at once, because they may all be slightly different. But it does have some of this kind of functionality in it. And then it has its own protocol for talking between like a master Webmin and a slave Webmin, which is just HTTP requests, really, normal web requests. So yeah, you can see there's a whole lot of modules here. Oh, one that's really popular is probably for postfix, which is a very common mail server. I've got various options in here. Mail aliases are probably a popular one. You can go and set up mail forwarding from various addresses to various other addresses. And normally if you want to do that, you have to go and edit some configuration files, so this simplifies that somewhat. DHCP is another handy. So if you're running a network and you want your laptops to get their addresses, to connect to the network automatically and get their IP addresses assigned, DHCP is the server that hands out IP addresses to workstations and laptops and the like. So you can set that up from Webmin, and you can say that, okay, on this network I want to hand out addresses in this range to these machines, or I want this particular machine to always be given the same address. That kind of thing. Oh, and one of the things probably worth showing is what I call theming in there. If I click on this one here, I can change the theme to, let me see if I can find that open country theme. So this is the user interface that that Open Country uses with their products. And I have another special one. Uh-oh, that's not good. Well, it looks like this talk will be over in 15 minutes. Whether I like it or not.
Don't have a power supply with you?
No, I didn't bring one actually. I thought it would last longer than that. And this theme is one specifically designed for virtual hosting, which is what when you have multiple mail and web domains on the same machine. So I can create this one. Sort of adds an additional layer onto the Webmin to make it easier for ISPs and hosting companies. So even though it's the same Webmin code, you can get quite a lot of different sort of looks and feels.
A theme is more than just a style sheet.
Yeah, it's more than just a style sheet. It can control the menus and the like the login screen and the colors, and it has quite a lot of control. It's much more than just a style sheet. it actually operates at the Perl code level rather than at the HTML level. And of course, it can apply a style sheet, and a lot of the themes do apply a style sheet, but it's more than just that.
You should have a lot more themes there than come with the product.
Yeah.
There's only 3 or 4, right?
Huh?
It's only 4 or 5. 3 or 4 you see in Webmin when you look at themes.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of themes I had installed there the core comes with like about 4 of them, but I have some that are under development or created for special purposes, or some people will pay me to like create a special theme to match their corporate colours or so forth. So I have them all installed on this laptop because it has my complete development environment on there. So
what do you use to back up that laptop?
I have my own. Well, actually, this isn't my real main development machine. This just has a synced copy. I rsync all the files from my real server to this laptop before I came out here tonight. So I have the latest version of Webmin to demo, and I use Webmin's backup features to back up to a removable USB hard drive every week, just in case. So, yeah. And of course, I have people downloading my code all the time, so we don't have to back up at all.
You just have to beg to get a copy back.
Yeah, actually, that probably wouldn't be a very good strategy because only the core distribution is downloaded. There's a lot of other stuff that's under development that is not out there. Oh, and in case I didn't mention it before, all of Webmin is written in Perl, so I mean, Perl is by definition like an open source language. Perl scripts are their own source code, so anyone can go in and modify it if they want to, and people can create their own additional modules that can be installed into an existing web system running Webmin. So it's like a plugin that you can add later, and there's a whole API that's available for developers who want to write their own modules. Another thing that a lot of people work on is translations. A lot of people have submitted translations to me. Like I can switch to. There's a lot of funny ones in there, right? But the most complete translation, right, is Catalan, which is like a sub-language used in Spain, I think. So if I go in here, I mean, like all this stuff is in Catalan now. I don't even know what half this stuff means actually now. I click on users and groups, right? So, there's a whole translation system in there. All the text that's in Webmin is stored in files that are loaded at runtime, depending on what language you've got selected. And each user who logs into Webmin can have his own different language, if need be. And there's like a pretty well supported German translation, and Chinese and Japanese. This Catalan one, French. Most of the major languages. They're in there. And the way it works is if some message has not been translated into whatever language, it falls back to displaying it in English. So, that's quite a nice feature if you're interested in that.
50-some translations, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how many languages there are. It's probably not 50, it's more like 20, but there's like a curve between the ones that are really well translated at the top, and then you've got, right down the bottom, you've got things like Klingon, which have got almost no translation at all. I don't even know why that's in there. Someone put that in. It's a lot of work to do a translation because there must be like 100,000 messages in the code that you'd have to translate if you wanted to cover the whole thing, including help pages and so forth. But every little bit helps. And there's a program, there's actually a module you can install that will create translations and email them to me automatically. So that lets people do the translations from within Webmin itself. Like this one's pretty good. You can see a few messages up here, like this new one, jump to groups. That's something I added recently. So obviously this guy hasn't got around to translating that particular one yet. People, translators come and go. And there are quite a few people creating their own plugin modules as well. People often use Webmin as the basis for other applications and systems. It's been used a lot for like server appliances, backup appliances. Like if you're wanting to create some kind of box, right, that connects to a network, an appliance, is going to need to have some user interface. Typically that's going to be a web-based interface. And for companies that want to do that, and they don't want to reinvent the wheel of creating their own entire web server and login and authentication system and so forth, they can go and take Webmin and modify it a bit and use that as their administration interface. So I know of several companies, many companies that have done that, and I've helped out a few of them as well. Because all these modules that you see in here, like for managing users and groups, they have an internal API, a set of functions that can be called by other modules or code to say, read the users on the system or create a new user. So if you're wanting to do any kind of system administration task from a program, you can actually call the functions in Webmin to do that from Perl code that you write. And that's quite useful for people who are wanting to create their own user interface to do various tasks.
Is that from within your own Webmin module or from any Perl program?
Either. It's easier to do it from within your own Webmin module, but you can do it from any Perl program if you put a bit of sort of boilerplate code at the top to initialize the Webmin environment.
We're using it to supplement features in our proprietary management product, and basically you're pushing scripts up to it and having them executed in Perl, and you're getting these functions added to whatever you're doing, and that's one way you can use it also.
In fact, just in the last couple of releases, I added this way to make XML RPC calls, which for those who it's sort of like a way of some other program running on some completely different computer, talking to Webmin and telling it to execute some function, say create a user or whatever, using a kind of standard XML-based protocol. So that expands it further to how it can be used. So, I think I've pretty much covered everything I can think of to cover, so any more questions?
Could you talk about just generally what's involved in creating a module?
So, okay. A module is really a set of, the module is written almost always in Perl, and it's a set of like CGI programs, Perl CGI programs. And typically the way it's done is, you create a new directory for your module, and you create a library file for your module. Say your module is called foo, you create a foo-lib.pl file in there, and that contains certain core functions that you define for reading whatever configuration file that your module is interested in managing. And then you create a set of .cgi files that then that use that library to that you created to read whatever configuration file you want and to output the HTML that the user uses for editing it. So basically, if you're familiar with Perl CGI programming, then it's not too difficult to create a Webmin module. And of course, when you do this, you have access to the API that Webmin provides. So there's like what I call a core API, which has functions for various kinds of locking and reading and writing files, reading files into memory so they can be easily managed, and all kinds of stuff like that. Like downloading URLs. And then there's the library. There's the API that's exported by all the other modules. So every other module that's currently on the system has its own API for doing things like managing users or cron jobs. So if you write your own module, you can call to these APIs for other modules. Yeah.
So who would handle the creating the HTML to do the screen formatting and parsing and stuff like that?
So in this case, this side is created by the theme, so your code doesn't have to worry about that. You're responsible for it is this part. But even this part, there's a standard function that generates this header, and then there's standard functions that can generate like this table and the sort of buttons on the top of the table and things like that. So there's a library that comes with Webmin. But
Here we go.
oh, sorry, out of batteries.
A couple of things to know is the webmin.com site has a lot of information, obviously. And there is an excellent book on Webmin written by Jamie.
Oh yeah.
Called
Managing Linux Systems with Webmin.
And it's really a very well written book. And it kind of gives you the outside-in picture, and it's broken into sections. If you really want to understand, it's a book well worth having.
Yeah, and it has some information about programming your own modules in there and about using the existing ones. I think it's a couple of years old now, but it's still, everything that's in there is still applicable. I mean, your new features are being added, but anything that book says to do will still be doable in the current version, basically.
There's actually a PDF of that book on the site, but
Oh yeah, that's true.
yes, when you're really trying to learn something, it's a tough way to go, but it still works.
Yeah. It was published under some open content.
Open publication?
Yeah, open
Awesome.
publication, that's the one, yeah. So you can download it as well if you want to print out the full 400 pages. Probably cheaper to buy it. Yeah, anything else? Any other questions?
So this is a piece of a major way to make Linux a popular, usable system that can be put into schools, nations.
Yeah, I mean, its aim is to make Linux easier to use. It's not like an idiot-proof system. It's not for your total novice. You've got to have some understanding of Unix or networking concepts, like what is a user, what is a group, what is DNS. But it's to make your sort of novice system administrator able to do things without having to mess with actual files.
Explain to me this part of it now. It's a web-based browser. You access it through your browser,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not intended for remote access over the internet.
It can be. It can be.
Where you do a secure shell to.
No, it does HTTPS.
Yes, you can access it over the internet, and it can run in a secure mode, like an SSL mode, so you have an HTTPS
Any web browser anywhere.
URL.
Okay, so and you can do the web-based administration over a secure shell link.
Yeah, or a secure, an SSL link, but yeah.
So that a customer at a remote site, you don't have to go. You can
Oh yeah.
So I
pop right over there and fix it.
That's what Scott uses it.
That's what I use it for. I use it because you can just sit there and control the whole, most of the system through it. That which you can't control through Webmin, you can do through SSH.
But to control the server with Webmin, Webmin has to be installed on that server.
Correct, yes.
And you can also lock it down, so you can make it so that it only responds to requests from specific IPs. You can do all, you can lock it down because of all the utility units.
Yeah.
Is that in Webmin's config, or is that just the firewall?
There's actually, well, there is some of it in Webmin too, but I usually use the firewall.
Yeah, it has its own built-in IP access control.
Is there a way to set it up so that, like, if you have some administrator that he can like push changes to 50 desktop machines in one big fat?
Well, Open Country does that better than Webmin does. The Open Country product, because if your machines are almost never identical, and so to handle those cases, you need something a bit smarter than, I mean, because obviously there are some cluster management tools inside of Webmin, but since almost never are all the machines identical, doing just straight pushes is kind of a great way to get yourself in trouble.
It does have some features in there for installing packages
Right.
on multiple machines. Yeah. But
But
of course, those machines have to be running Webmin themselves. But they're sort of running it in a kind of slave mode, and you have one master that can push out packages. But yeah, like it's not the smartest piece of code.
We're kind of going in that direction with some plans so that Webmin can know more about what's out there. Its value is, though, it's stateless, so it doesn't keep a database and overwrite your stuff. And but it does back up everything that it writes. It's kind of like NFS. Everybody wanted it to be stateful. It became a nightmare when it was stateful, and the Sun backed away from it. But you can pretty much live inside of Webmin.
Yeah.
Pretty much do. There's some things that you'll do outside of it, but
it has a module for a command line module, a very simple command line where you can type in commands and see the output, and that can be useful in a pinch. And it has I didn't demo it, but it has like a file manager module where you can go and navigate through the directories on your system, and you can go and edit configuration files directly and manually.
What I like about it over a lot of the other tools that are out there is that because you were really good about not changing configuration files, that you can put stuff that Webmin does not understand in config files and then it won't choke on them.
Yeah, and there are cases like that.
Do. They'll just sit there and chew on your stuff and then you're like,
Yeah. I mean, there are some kinds of Apache configuration directives that I don't understand, but basically.
But you don't do anything with them when you see them. That's the good news. And
Yeah.
I've run into server to management it's systems that will actually go, oh, I don't know what that is, and rip it out.
Well, I just think of the latest, when Ubuntu releases 6.10 or 6.01
But one upgrade.
well, they this thing had, I had to go through and delete all my printers and reinstall them. Because they changed the print demon and had to have all the print.
Yeah.
And there's so many, stuff I haven't done in 15 years in Linux, I had to do to get my machine running again. And I was just thinking to myself, I wish that Webmin could save me from that kind of a fiasco. He said, all these busted configuration files on this upgrade, and the stupid stuff that you would have fixed before you published the web browser is screwed up on the way it starts Adobe PostScript Reader, you know? Yeah,
It doesn't really deal with that kind of thing, unfortunately. I mean, it assumes that your system is sort of working.
You have a cups module in there, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it could help you set up your printers, but it wouldn't help you migrate.
It wouldn't help you migrate them, but you can use it as an interface.
Yeah, it has a nice module for, like, I mean, with cups, which is, you know, the new standard Linux print system. You can set up pretty much all the printers and all the options pretty nicely.
I just used a version, using Webmin to set up a printer, it didn't find all of the cups drivers.
Oh, really? Maybe it was looking in the wrong directories. That's one problem, I guess, is that
Cups is not in a consistent place.
yeah, I mean, it has basically says, okay, if you're installing on this operating system, then these are the directories I'm going to look in for the drivers. But you know, unfortunately, it may be out of date. So.
Is there any chance it was in a package that you hadn't installed or something?
Oh yeah,
There's always a chance I'm in there.
some distributions include some of the additional drivers in a separate package.
Yeah.
And they only have some of the real core ones, like
Like a Bluetooth.
It's like getting the fonts in Open Office, which is fun. All of that. But the design philosophy you have is, if you don't know, you let people go ahead and do it. I said that Microsoft's like IBM, 10,000 error messages to say wrong, guess why?
batteries. Any other questions?
Well, where are you gonna, what are you working on now and where are you gonna go next with it?
Oh, let's see. I mean, we're working a fair bit on improving virtual hosting, which is like, you know, when you have one machine that has multiple websites on it. And there's a whole lot of other incremental changes and improvements that need to be done, you know, cleaning up the user interface.
I got a question of the books published, introductory books on Linux. What's one that does a good job of describing how to use Webmin? Have you seen anybody that,
Yeah, the one that I wrote.
besides you?
Oh.
The other guide to Linux.
There are some that have like a chapter in it, but I can't remember them off the top of my head really. It's not hugely covered, and most of the books tend to focus on more command line stuff. I find they don't really.
Joe Cooper's book's a little old.
Yeah, there's another one that's specifically about Webmin as well. There's like, you know, there's a couple of books on Webmin in English, and there's another one in German that I've got a copy of. But you know, if you're looking for like an introductory Linux book, yeah, most of them may have a chapter on Webmin.
Most of them don't have anything on it though, the introductory ones.
Yeah, that's probably true. Go to that Google book search, right, and search for Webmin and see which books contain it in their table of contents. That's always fun.
Like, what's her name, the girl that wrote the system administrator book? Yeah, that'd be a place where it would really be a good chapter item.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, most of those books more focus on the lower level stuff.
It's an interesting problem because there aren't a lot of sites telling you what's wrong with Webmin and how to fix it.
If there is anything wrong, let me know.
There isn't any to do that because there's no use for that. And it's kind of like things which have a lot of problems get spread around. How many sites can you find to fix Windows stuff? 1 million? 10 million?
Well, the problems you usually run into in system management aren't Webmin problems or are problems that it doesn't directly address. And what it's nice to be able to do is use it as a high-level tool, but we still have to dive down to the command line from time to time. I mean, and that's probably one of the reasons you don't see it like in just totally newbie books, because as he was saying earlier, you have to understand the concepts of what it's changing. It's like, it's a power tool, so you have to understand the basic stuff before you get the power tools, because you'll hurt yourself. But once you know that, that's really true. And that's where it's really handy, is because it just speeds up the whole interaction and time it takes to get things done. But you also have to remember, you got to know kind of what's going on. If you just sort of go, oh, cool, look at this, click, 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 you'll end up in deep trouble real fast, because basically you're root on a web interface.
Yeah, you could end up deleting your root user and your system will be unusable.
Right.
Well, it will warn you if you
there are a lot of things it won't warn you, though. It'll very happily let you do things that, that it assumes that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, you could go and reformat your root partition or something.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
It will give you worry about it too, but you can move a lot of files without it asking you for any questions.
Yeah, probably one area of improvement that maybe it needs is more, are you sure you want to do this kind of screens? I try and display them in cases where where you're going to do something that causes serious data loss. Whereas, like say deleting a single, DNS domain, right? It's not something that I consider serious data loss, but some people may.
Do you really want to remove, etc.?
I think those "are you sure" messages are kind of plain. Do you really want to do that? Are you sure? I've got a phone that if I want to do something, I have to keep switching back and forth for yes or no. I can't just keep clicking to do something because it assumes I'm going to make a mistake.
Yeah. Put in master mode, that's all it is.
Yeah, that's really an option to say, don't ask me.
Yeah, don't ask me dumb questions.
Yeah.
But even that's a bit dangerous.
Just have the screen change come up when it thinks you're going to do a mistake, but let it keep going and keep going.
Have you looked at doing anything? I mean, we're starting to see a lot more just straight virtualization and having Webmin work, over virtual machines. And it's sort of like multiple systems management, except they're almost all going to be identical.
Yeah, there is. I mean, if you run it on Solaris, there's a module in there for zones, Solaris zones, which are like virtual machines running within the same machine. And it lets you set those up and configure those. And I'm looking at creating something similar for that for Linux.
For user mode Linux, or?
Maybe V servers, something like that. I'm still looking to see which one is the best.
Yeah, there's like three major ones.
Does Sun ship Webmin?
Do they ship Webmin? Yeah, they included with Solaris.
It comes with Solaris?
Yeah, it's one of their.
Didn't you say that was your best implementation?
Oh yeah, actually it initially started being developed on Solaris, so not Linux. Linux was probably a bit immature at the time I started developing it, believe it or not. And it still works very, very well on Solaris. And it's a nice operating system. And some of the modules are actually specific to Solaris, like this zones one, and there's one for Solaris has this access control system called RBAC that Webmin can configure that lets you do some pretty fancy access control stuff on Unix, granting extra permissions to certain processes and so forth, and certain limits. So on Solaris it does have some special features.
I know you already handle LVM and all that stuff pretty well too. So.
Yeah, that's a Linux specific one, and there may be something equivalent to that on Solaris, but unfortunately it's not.
It's not supported on that one.
No, it's not yet configured.
I was just curious, so you're just trying to determine which one of the virtualization environments you're like.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been pretty good about supporting lots of different things, but.
Yeah, I mean, it may be possible to write code in such a way that it's generic and you can use whatever one you've got installed. But even then, I don't know, because all the different virtualization environments operate at different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Operate different sort of levels of the system. It's hard to say which one. Now, I'm still looking into it to see which one is the best.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, which one is?
The locking that you talked about earlier, is that done by the module or by the product?
It's done by, well, there's a common function that a product supplies to do the locking. Let's put it that way. So a module can say, I want to open this file and lock it. Open it for writing. and lock it. So it's a combination of both. And there's not sort of automatic locking on every single file that you touch. You have to say, I want to lock this file.
So the programmer has to explicitly figure out what their locking strategy is going to be, and
Yes.
whether they want to re-look up the data or not.
Well, you can't really sort of re-look it up because there's not really any caching that goes on.
Any what?
Caching. I mean, yeah, you always have to read the file.
Well, what I mean is like if you open a configuration file that has a bunch of entries in it, you get a screen with all the entries.
Yeah.
You click on one entry if you want to edit it, brings you to another screen. You edit it, and you go back and it shows you what it originally opened. So really, the programmer might want to, before the person commits it, recheck the file and see if anything's changed, and then.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. The locking doesn't really operate at that level. It operates at the sort of when you're saving the record out, it checks to see that nothing else is writing to the same file. But I see what you mean. You're talking about like almost like a session level or an object level locking. That is one area where Webmin does not do anything at the moment.
So there could be races.
Right, you can have race conditions.
One problem that people have reported is like, you have two people go in and they both click on the same user and they both brought up a screen for that user.
Right.
Then the first user saves, right? And then the second user saves, but then the second user's changes have overwritten the first ones.
Right.
Preventing that would be nice, but it's also tricky
The
because
case,
you don't know what happens if some guy opens a user, opens something for editing, and then quits his browser and goes home, right? And he's effectively got a lock on this thing, and there's no way that the Webmin server can know that he's quit the web browser unless you sort of time out.
Well, you've got that logging mechanism that records the actions that were taken.
Yeah.
So you can consult whether a log entry has been created in the time since you've opened the screen.
no, it doesn't handle the case where if someone is the password file while you're opening the password file. It's say you open up and you're doing users and group editing, and I jump in and add a user.
Right, but
When you write it back, it loses the.
say you open the password file and start entering a user. Meantime, I open the password file and start
I did it with VI.
making a change.
I did it with VI.
That doesn't matter. Everybody's using Webmin.
That doesn't happen.
Well, if everybody's using Webmin, that's the only thing you can enforce. Then you can check the log file to see if a change has been made since the time that I opened the screen.
You can look for, what I would do is I would look for a change in the timestamp from the time you loaded the file to the time you write it back.
Yes.
And if that time has changed, then you go warning.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be
I did do a bit of that in some cases, like for email, but it hasn't really been expanded beyond that at the moment. But yeah, that's a good idea. That is.
When you change a configuration file, like for a patch or something, isn't your strategy to have a button to restart the service rather than automatically stop or start a service?
Yes.
So you might change something, and the next time it instantiates is on reboot if you don't click on the button.
Yeah, it's possible. I think it's a tricky problem to solve, but I think the time-based thing probably makes the most sense.
You don't want to, that gets you around having to do session management, but it lets the person working on stuff know something's changed underneath them.
Yeah, that's right. At least you can.
You can back out. You can say, oh, well, okay, roll.
You can't have a deadly embrace in Webmin, can you?
Like a deadlock? No, you can't have a deadlock. You could have a deadlock actually. If two things acquired locks on two different things in the opposite order, but that would pretty much.
A deadly embrace is when two processes work on a third.
Yeah. You theoretically could happen, but in practice it would never happen because things will always be locked in the same order. Yeah.
I ran into the problem, that's how I know about it.
Yeah, thank you.